My name is Emily Harper. I'm 34 years old. The day my father refused to walk me down the aisle wasn't the day he broke my heart. It was simply the day everyone else finally saw who he had become. I grew up in a small town outside Louisville, Kentucky. My father, Richard Harper, was one of the most respected men in town. People admired him. They trusted him. At church, he was the man everyone listened to. For years, I admired him too. Then I grew up, and I started noticing things. Comments he made about certain people, judgments he disguised as opinions, ideas he defended that made me uncomfortable. Whenever I questioned him, he told me I was young and didn't understand how the world worked. Eventually, I stopped arguing. I left for college, built my own life, and created some distance between us. That's where Marcus entered my life. I met him while working at a community health center. What stood out wasn't how he looked. It was how he treated people. Everyone mattered to Marcus. Patients, coworkers, strangers. He treated them all with the same kindness. We became friends, then best friends, then something more. Over the next several years, he became the person I trusted most. When life was difficult, Marcus stayed. When things were good, he celebrated with me. Being with him felt easy, natural, like home. 2 years later, he proposed during a quiet walk by the river. No crowd, no cameras, just the two of us. And before he could even finish asking the question, I said yes. For a few weeks, I felt happier than I ever had before. Then it was time to tell my parents. I hoped my father would surprise me. I hoped he would see what I saw in Marcus. I was wrong. The moment we sat down for dinner, I could feel the tension. My mother barely spoke. My father watched Marcus carefully. Halfway through the meal, I finally shared the news. Marcus and I are getting married. Silence. My mother forced a smile. My father didn't. He stared at Marcus, then looked at me. What exactly are you thinking? The room immediately went cold. Dad, I said carefully, we love each other. My father leaned back in his chair. The look on his face told me everything. This wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a fight. Then he said the words that changed everything. People like him don't belong in this family. The silence afterward felt endless. I looked at my mother. She stared at her plate. I looked at Marcus. His expression never changed. My father continued, I won't pretend I'm happy about this. Marcus remained calm. I didn't ask you to pretend, he said quietly. The answer only made my father angrier. Dinner ended minutes later. No congratulations, no excitement, no support. Just disappointment hanging over the entire room. On the drive home, I stared out the window while Marcus drove. Finally, I whispered, maybe this is too much. Marcus glanced at me, then shook his head. No. What do you mean? His hand found mine. I asked you to marry me. He squeezed my fingers gently. Not your father. At the time, I thought my father's reaction was the biggest obstacle we would face. I had no idea something far bigger was already moving toward us. Because within a few weeks, a stranger from my father's past would appear, and that stranger carried a secret powerful enough to change my wedding day forever. My father's reaction didn't stay at the dinner table. Over the next few weeks, it spread through the family. Phone calls started coming. Relatives who had never cared about my personal life suddenly had opinions. Some told me to slow down. Others suggested I reconsider. Nobody said the real reason out loud. They didn't need to. Everyone already knew. My father stopped calling, stopped answering messages, and whenever Marcus's name came up, the conversation ended. The deeper we moved into wedding planning, the worse things became. Even my mother seemed trapped between us. One afternoon, she drove to my apartment alone. She looked exhausted, like someone carrying a burden she couldn't put down. Over coffee, she quietly said, "Your father isn't handling this well." I almost laughed. That's obvious. She stared into her cup for a moment, then said something strange. "Some wounds never heal, Emily." I frowned. "What wounds?" For a second, it looked like she was about to tell me something important, something she'd kept hidden for years. But then she shook her head. "Forget I said anything." And just like that, the moment was gone. A few days later, Marcus and I attended a charity fundraiser downtown. The room was packed with people from all over the county. While Marcus stepped away to get drinks, an elderly man approached me. I had never seen him before, yet the way he looked at me felt strangely familiar. "You look just like her," he said. "Like who?" "Your grandmother." My heart skipped. "You knew my grandmother?" He nodded. "Very well." Before I could ask another question, he studied me carefully and asked, "Does your father still get nervous when people talk about the past?" A chill ran through me. "What past?" The man gave me a sad smile. "The one he's spent 30 years trying to forget." Then he walked away. Just like that. No explanation, no answers, only questions. When Marcus returned, I was still staring across the room. "What happened?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "I think I just met someone who knows a secret about my father." At the time, I thought it was a strange encounter, nothing more. I had no idea that man was about to become the most important person at my wedding, or that his arrival would force my father to face a truth he'd spent 30 years hiding. As the wedding got closer, my father's behavior became harder to ignore. He wasn't just unhappy. He was trying to stop the wedding. Family members suddenly avoided conversations about Marcus. Friends started acting uncomfortable around us. Even the church wasn't immune. One evening, Pastor Allen called and asked to meet. When Marcus and I arrived, he looked embarrassed. "Your father has concerns about the wedding," he said carefully. I already knew what that meant. Marcus remained calm. "The wedding is still happening," he said. The pastor nodded. "It is." But the conversation left me uneasy. My father seemed terrified of something, and I was beginning to believe it wasn't my marriage. A few days later, my mother appeared at my apartment again. This time she looked frightened. After several minutes of silence, she finally said, "If something happened years ago, something people regret." I stared at her. What happened? Tears filled her eyes. For one moment, I thought she would finally tell me the truth. Instead, she stood up and left. The next day, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Inside was an old photograph. My father was in it, my mother was in it, and so was the elderly man from the fundraiser. Written on the back were 5 words. "Ask him about July, 1994. That night, I drove straight to my parents' house. I found my father in the garage. The moment he saw the photograph, his face turned pale. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. "Who is that man?" I asked. He ignored the question. I pointed to the words on the back. "What happened in July 1994? Before he could answer, my mother appeared in the doorway. The look on her face told me she already knew. Both of them did. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then my father crumpled the photograph in his hand. "Leave." I couldn't believe it. After all the questions, after all the secrets, that was his answer? As I drove home, one thing became clear. Whatever happened in July 1994 wasn't just a family disagreement. It was something much bigger, something powerful enough to frighten my father 30 years later. That night, I told Marcus everything. The photograph, the date, my father's reaction. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment, then asked one question. "What if your father isn't afraid of the marriage?" I frowned. "Then what is he afraid of?" Marcus looked at me. The truth. At the time, I didn't know how right he was, but I was about to find out. because the wedding was only days away, and the man from the photograph was getting closer to the center of it all. The wedding was only a few days away when the elderly man finally called me. His name was David Brooks, the same man from the fundraiser, the same man from the photograph. We met at a small diner outside town. The moment I sat down, he slid an envelope across the table. Inside were old photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of David with my parents, church events, family gatherings, community projects. In every photo, they looked close, very close. "You were friends?" I asked. David gave a sad smile. "Best friends." I couldn't understand it. If they had once been so close, why had I never heard his name? "Because your father erased me," David said quietly. The answer sent a chill through me. What happened in 1994? David looked out the window. For a moment, he seemed lost in another time. Finally, he said, "Your father made a choice." "What kind of choice?" "He chose his reputation over the truth." Before I could ask more, he stood. The meeting was over, but as he reached the door, he turned back. "There is one thing you should know." I waited. "Your father isn't afraid of your marriage." His eyes met mine. "He's afraid of me." Then he left. The next morning, my father showed up at my apartment. For the first time in months, his face looked exhausted. The moment he stepped inside, he asked, "Did you meet David?" "Yes." His jaw tightened. "What did he tell you?" "Not enough." For several seconds, he stared at me. Then he delivered an ultimatum. "If David Brooks comes to your wedding, I won't." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father was willing to miss his own daughter's wedding because of one man, one secret, one truth. "Who is he?" I asked again. My father looked like he wanted to answer, like he wanted to finally tell me everything. Instead, he turned toward the door. Halfway there, he stopped. Without looking back, he said, "Some truths destroy families." Then he walked away. That night, I barely slept. The wedding was less than 24 hours away, and I still didn't know why my father feared David so much. The next morning, the church filled with guests, family, friends, neighbors, everyone expecting a wedding, nobody realizing they were about to witness a secret that had survived for 30 years. And before the day was over, the entire town would learn the truth. The church was full. Friends, family, neighbors, everyone had come to celebrate a wedding. Nobody knew they were about to witness a 30-year-old secret come crashing into the open. Just minutes before the ceremony, my father pulled me aside. His face looked pale, worn, afraid. "Is David coming?" he asked. I didn't answer directly. That was answer enough. My father closed his eyes, then said the words I never imagined hearing. "If he walks into this church, I won't." I stared at him. "You'd miss your daughter's wedding?" His voice trembled. "You don't understand." "No," I said quietly. "I don't." For a moment, I thought he would finally tell me the truth. Instead, he shook his head, then added, "If you choose this, walk yourself down the aisle." With that, he walked away. A few minutes later, I stood behind the church doors. The music began. Guests turned toward the entrance. The doors opened, and the entire church fell silent. Because I wasn't alone. Standing beside me was David Brooks. Gasps spread through the room. Older members of the congregation recognized him immediately. Whispers started moving through the pews. David calmly offered me his arm. I took it. Together we began walking down the aisle. Halfway to the altar, my father suddenly stood. His face had gone white. "No." The word echoed through the sanctuary. "You don't belong here." David stopped. His expression never changed. "I belong here as much as you do." The room went silent again. Then an elderly church member stood up, Mrs. Peterson. She looked directly at my father and said something nobody expected. "Tell them the truth, Richard." A ripple of shock moved through the church. Several older members exchanged nervous looks. It was obvious they knew something. My father's confidence disappeared. For the first time in my life, he looked trapped. David took a slow breath, then spoke. Richard never told anyone who I really was. The church held its breath. My father closed his eyes, like a man watching his world collapse. Then David said the sentence that changed everything. I wasn't just his friend. A pause. Then, I was his brother. Gasps erupted throughout the sanctuary. People stared in disbelief. My father had a brother? An entire brother nobody had ever mentioned? David continued. The reason I disappeared wasn't because I left. His voice remained steady. It was because I was adopted. The room became completely silent. My biological parents were black. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. David's eyes filled with emotion. But Vera Harper raised me as her son. I looked toward my father. Tears streamed down his face. Suddenly, everything made sense. The fear, the prejudice, the secrecy, the panic whenever David appeared. For 30 years, my father had hidden the one truth that exposed every hateful belief he claimed to defend. And now the entire church knew it. There was nowhere left to hide. For several seconds after David's words, the church remained silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My father stood frozen in the aisle. The man who always seemed to have an answer suddenly had none. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were full of tears. "It's true," he said. A murmur spread through the congregation. My father took a shaky breath. My mother adopted David when he was a baby. He looked toward his brother, and she loved him exactly the same as she loved me. The church listened in complete silence. When people started talking about him, I should have defended him. His voice cracked, but I didn't. He lowered his head. I cared more about what people thought than about my own brother. David stood quietly, letting him speak. For the first time in 30 years, the truth was finally being heard. Then my father looked directly at David. "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but everyone in the room understood how long they had taken to arrive. David's eyes filled with emotion. Neither man spoke for several seconds. Then my father extended his hand. The entire church watched. David looked at it, looked at his brother, and finally took it. A collective breath seemed to release throughout the room. 30 years of silence ended in one moment. Then my father turned toward Marcus, the man he had judged from the very beginning. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. "You still have time to be right." Even my father managed a small smile. Pastor Allen stepped forward. "I believe we still have a wedding to finish." A few people laughed softly. The tension finally broke. David looked at me. "You still need someone to walk you down the aisle?" I smiled through my tears. "Yes, I do." Together we walked the rest of the way to the altar. This time, nobody objected. Nobody stood in the way. When we reached Marcus, David placed my hand in his, then stepped back beside my father, not separated by secrets anymore, standing together as brothers. The ceremony itself was simple, beautiful, exactly what Marcus and I had wanted. A short time later, we exchanged rings, shared our vows, and were finally pronounced husband and wife. The church erupted in applause. Later that evening, during the reception, I watched my father and David sitting together at the same table, talking quietly, trying to rebuild something that should never have been broken. Would everything be perfect after that? No. Real life doesn't work that way. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, a beginning is enough. As the sun set outside the church, David smiled at me and shared something my grandmother used to say. Family isn't who looks like you, he paused. It's who stays. I looked at Marcus, at David, even at my father, and for the first time, I understood exactly what she meant. My father refused to walk me down the aisle because of my groom's race, but when those church doors opened, the truth walked in first, and the truth changed everything. The end.